Welcome back to Refactoring Paley Road, where we take a 20-year-old Mac app and modernize it. This episode, we're going from red to orange. What does that mean? Well, I consider the status of the app to be red at the beginning of this video. In other words, it's not usable. Green would be the app's in great shape. It's ready to go. People should just dive on it if they want to and use it. But we're not quite there yet. We're a long way to go before I think it's going to be green. But our goal in this episode is just to get it to orange, where you can sort of work on it, but it's not where we want it to be. And so the focus of this episode is a continuation of what we were doing last episode, where we're getting our file to read and write properly with our new system. So this video is about those bug fixes. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one because I want to start moving on to the next issue we have with this SQLite that we're trying to isolate. But right now, we're just going to get bugs fixed. Now, what I'm going to do differently in this episode is I had Claude Code write my slides based on the bug fixes that I made for this particular video. So all I did was use Claude Code, write a prompt where it would look at my changes in my code, and write some slides. So there's some things that are kind of inaccurate in there, but for the most part, it looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and give this a go and see what we can do with it. So this is the beginning of what Claude has created. Issue 51 is the card that I have in my Kanban board, is number 51 for this fix. And we're going to talk about the issues that I had to fix to get the app running correctly. What was broken? Well, the problem that the app was having is that we still read and write to SQLite files. But a lot of the code has been bypassing our new document model. What we want to have happen is that nobody bypasses the document model to get to the SQLite. We're not there yet, but we've done a lot of work, but it wasn't quite fixed. And that's what we're trying to fix. We could not read correctly. We could not write correctly. So we need to get that done. And so what we found initially was things like data were being discarded, couldn't read the colors correctly. There was just little bits of problems here and there. If you see the symptoms observed section there, the data layers were missing when we save and reopen. The individual petals of the rows diagram may have plotted but weren't actually there. Some layers disappeared between saving and loading. Some stayed, some went away. And when interacting with the plot itself, I ended up with a crash. That was kind of a bonus one that I just had to add to this set of fixes just to make the app orange rather than keeping it red where I wasn't confident to be used. So we looked at all these areas and fixed them in this particular set of commits. One problem was the save flow. The layers never actually fully went to disk. And it turned out that we had some problems with the write to URL method, and the in-memory layer never correctly stored everything to files. So all we did was we changed the order of some behavior. Save layers and return error was a piece of code that should have run before we actually do the saving to make sure that everything was in the correct state before it saved. A very simple fix in general. This issue is still there, but we're trying to sort this out. So when we create a data set, in other words, we're reading from a file and we want to create a data set, all that still bypasses our document model. We're not quite there yet. So you can see a flow over here on the right where we create a new data set, the data set's empty, and all sorts of weirdness happens. So the file's not actually created correctly. Here we're having this thing where we're kind of working with the memory store and kind of not working with the document model quite the way I want. But it's now working. It's a bit of a weird thing that I'm not quite ready to fully stop the bypassing of the document model, but we're going to in the next episode, I hope. That change is going to be quite big because we have to change how we're dealing with the tables themselves. When we load a table from disk, how do we manage that? And right now that isn't being done very well. And so that will be the next major thing to tackle. We also had some really weird bugs that had to do with casting. We found some bugs around casting from Int32 to numbers, various kinds of numbers. Could be an NS number or it could be an Int64. All these things weren't not casting correctly. So sometimes it would cause hard to find bugs. Once we had the casting correct, that solved that problem. So that helped manage the layers. We also lost layers on import. So when we loaded the data and tried to save it, again, this is that whole process that kind of bypasses our document model. It was broken because it wasn't working correctly. I would argue it's still not working correctly, but we did some changes to save the data into the in-memory layer before making some changes. It was a sequential thing, but it was a minor fix and it solved the problem. So our next bug had to do with dropping layers. So we had some sequence of events that would cause layers to be dropped. It was a relatively simple fix to fix this thing, a race condition that would cause data loss. That's always bad, but we found it. We also found that the colors weren't properly being stored. It's really important that the colors actually be stored to the in-memory store and then consequently down all the way to the file itself. And that wasn't working. So that caused a few problems. And the last bug we fixed in this section was text layer drag. The only layer that you want to drag around is a text layer because it always creates it in the middle of the plot and you want to drag it somewhere that makes sense. The problem is, for some reason, the text layer really didn't have regular drag support. And so when you tried to drag it, it would crash. It's kind of a simple bug. I'm not sure why it didn't have drag support. It could have been something that was taken out at some point in the past because something wasn't working right. And so we reintroduced that so you can move the text layer around so you can see the text somewhere useful. And we had a few extra bug fixes along the way. We have a few lessons that we learned from these commits. They're all lessons that I kind of know already, but they're worth talking about because, these issues are the kinds of things that crop up in all sorts of projects. The first one, of course, is trust the architecture. So we're changing the architecture of the application because I didn't trust the architecture of the application. So we created this document model. Right now, we still have objects that are bypassing the document model. And that's bad. And that's what we're trying to rectify. We want to make sure we trust the architecture and use it universally throughout the app. Verifying bridges from ints to NS number is not the same thing as an int64. So you have to be very careful about all these bridging between numbers and objects. You have to make sure that they're all correct. Silent failures are bad. Now, this is generally true. I'm not necessarily the best at always putting error messages in, especially in Objective-C, because Objective-C has a lot of overhead for errors. That's why I like errors in Swift, because you can use things like exceptions a little bit easier and have some good error messaging. So part of the problem that made this difficult to work with is that silent errors happening, we weren't catching them, we weren't doing anything, we weren't logging it. Those are hard to find, and you'll have no idea they're occurring. So we want to make sure, especially moving forward, that we try to avoid silent failures. There's going to be a lot in the app for a long time. We would also like to have a simpler reload system. Right now, read from store is kind of a big thing. It's hard for it to know what has changed, but this is actually going to likely go away anyway, because this problem will go away once we get rid of the in-memory. That's one of the goals. We're using the in-memory store to load up from disk and to act a little bit for undo, but we're not really doing undo and redo right now. But that's what that in-memory store was originally about, so we can undo things. But we really don't need it. We're moving away from it. So once we get rid of the in-memory store, this problem will go away. And the same is true for flush before read. You have to save the current state before you read it. If you don't, you clobber stuff and lose data. And that's what we're also trying to avoid. And test as much as you can. And that's kind of a basic lesson of why you get these kinds of bugs. Now, part of it is that These are things I would have looked for anyway, but since I got to a point and needed to stop for the video, these things weren't actually fully taken care of. So now they are, to an extent. There's a little bit of things going on here still that we still need to work on. So next time, we'll start once again trying to stop the bypassing of the document model to go into the in-memory store. So next time, let's get rid of some more SQLite calls from outside the document. My name's been Tom, and this has been Refactoring Powerlevel.